The Auror Who Cried Werewolf by ChaosAndCrumpets. Summary. Draco Malfoy could not be more prepared for his first night on the job as a newly qualified Auror. But Muggles have some strange additions at the best of times, and to make matters worse, his ostrich patronus keeps delivering his requests for assistance to the last person he wants to see him fail, Hermione Granger. A Dramione fanfiction. For possibly the first time in his life, Draco Malfoy felt completely prepared. His wand lay securely holstered against his thigh. He'd buffed his badge, with his own hand no less unaccustomed to manual labor and interaction with sticky substances like polish, revised his arrest protocols, memorized the memoranda, practiced his patronus. That memory of stomping on Potter's nose continued to make itself unfortunately useful, despite his many admirable attempts to reform that particular thought, and arranged his hair into the elegantly disheveled coif he favored as a suave and still charmingly rakish adult. He wanted to assure his appearance was a testament to his hard work and intrepidity, both an unexpectedly vigorous exertion required to encourage his badge to shine just so, and a longer, more arduous task of graduating from the Auror Academy. Draco was ready to serve the wizarding world and its people, even, should the occasion call for it, the odd Muggle. He had been ready ever since he had been forced to conclude, admittedly after a lengthy period of soul-searching likely extended by his inherent dislike of admitting that, quite possibly, he had been wrong. The Muggles actually smelled roughly the same as wizards. Better than some, if you counted Weasley. And so, with no small amount of trepidation or pride, and puffed up with the confidence of a man who had 1,000 years of history, money, and good genetics behind him, Draco left the manor for his first shift as a fully fledged productive memory of society, prepared to do his duty. "Be careful out there, darling," his mother said, concern written on her features as she saw him to the flue. Draco rolled his eyes. He'd been trained for this. There was nothing that could possibly catch him in unawareness. Hermione liked to consider herself something of an expert in creatures of the magical variety. She sort of had to be, as a specialist officer in the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. But even she found herself surprised by the appearance of a truly enormous bird when it materialized through the door of her office. "Auror Malfoy requesting urgent assistant. Possibly code 12E at Muggle residence. Address 17 Highfield Road." The bird, an ostrich, too big and pompous and generally feathery to be an emo, sat in a scathing drawl. Which in turn led to another surprise. The night apparently was to be full of them, because that voice, those crisp consonant and lengthened vowels, could only belong to one person. The only person, now that she thought about it, she could reconcile with a gracefully ostentatious yet demonstrably lethal bird known for ignoring any and all evidence of danger, Draco Malfoy. And what was more, he had, on what must still have been his first week in his new role, there was a certain amount of gossip to be heard in the kitchen if a person was interested in that sort of thing, managed to stumble into an interaction with a dangerous magical being. Hermione stood holstering her wand and summoning her cloak. Malfoy was by all measurable standards reformed, and objectively quite handsome. She couldn't very well leave him to die, even if he continued to be insufferably arrogant and rich. "Special Officer Granger responding. ETA 2 minutes. The boy, quite foolishly, continued in his struggles to return to the clutches of the demon Draco had rescued him from only moments before. He appeared unharmed, if slightly improperly dressed, green paint covering his face, in what Draco could only assume was an ill-thought-out effort by the demon to disguise the child as his own. "Listen here," Draco said in an attempt at authoritative patience. "I don't know what he told you, or what bargain he offered, but demons are extremely dangerous beings for fellows like yourself to be getting mixed up with at such a young age." The boy sniffled pathetically. The paint under his nose smeared thin. But he's my—" There, Draco said, quite kindly shoving his handkerchief into the boy's hand, where it was immediately redirected to the river of fluids leaking from his facial orifices. Draco tried to understand. Being kidnapped by a demon could be terribly hard on a young man. Draco could testify to that, sort of. But he would have to throw that handkerchief away now, not because the boy was a muggle, not at all, no. More because not even the most rigorously applied cleaning charms could convince him that there was no possibility of any trace of lingering nasal excrement. At least the act of cleaning himself had quieted down the boy's misguided protestations. "Now, we're just waiting for my colleague to arrive, who will entrap the wicked creature, so he can't harm anyone else. Then, well, quite honestly, I'm afraid they might insist on wiping your memory. Probably for the best, though, to be truthful. Wouldn't want this experience to traumatize you into adulthood." Draco cleared his throat awkwardly. Look, that will be Malfoy." Draco blinked. He'd missed the name of the responding specialist officer in all of his excitement. No, enthusiasm. It was, in fact, Hermione Granger. What with a full head of hair, noticeably shapely bosom, and reputed competence at her job. Draco felt his chest expand slightly. He was glad she would be here to witness his first arrest. "What have you done to this poor child, Malfoy?" she said in a tone that sounded surprisingly more accusatory than admiring. Irritation prickled somewhere below his ears. "I saved him. Look to me like a—" He glanced pointedly at the boy. "Copulation demon? An incubus? Not in front of the child, Granger. Please. You think he doesn't understand copulation, but he knows what an incubus is? I did at that age. It's been well evidenced you were a perverse and problematic little terror of a child. I wish I could say I'm surprised." Draco was prevented from setting Granger straight by the boy's wailing interruption. I want to go back to my dad." "You took him from his dad?" Granger was subjecting him to the full force of her not unterrifying glare, something that made Draco feel less comfortable and more aroused than he'd care to admit. "His dad is a sex demon, Granger. He's obviously suffering some side effect." "My dad is not a sex demon," the boy said again, in his voice almost intolerably high in pitch. Draco wondered if all children were this unfathomably weepy. "It's more than possible," he tried to assure him, increasing his volume in order to be heard over his cries. "Where is he?" Granger asked, crouching down and smiling kindly at the boy, while simultaneously pinning Draco in place with nothing more than the force of her eyes. "Petrified and disillusioned over there." He pointed to a bush in front of, honestly minuscule, 2 bedrooms at most, he thought in horror, Muggle home. "You'll find I followed the protocol to the letter." When Granger returned, her demeanor seemed to have worsened exponentially. And more immediately concerning the incubus, horrifyingly free of any constraints, followed angrily in her wake. "You idiot!" she said. "I beg you. It's Halloween." "I know," Draco said, eyeing the creature behind her warily. "The veil between the worlds is at its thinnest. That's how this. On Halloween, it's tradition for children to go house to house in fancy dress, requesting treats and playing tricks where none are given." He managed to tear his eyes from the glaring incubus at that. "Tricks? That sounds barbaric." although very demon-like, he thought. "Did you skip all of your Muggle studies lesson?" Granger asked with a withering roll of her eyes. "I was excused from taking them." Draco tried to explain. "Of course you were. You owe this man an apology, Malfoy." It was clear to Hermione that Draco Malfoy had about as much hands-on experience with incubi as the average Muggle, which was probably a good thing, she could admit. The poor Muggle dad's appearance had been missing 5 of the 7 core attributes of any demon subspecies. Plastic horns and skin painted vibrant red accounted for the 2 characteristics that had been mistakenly confirmed, and he had been completely lacking any of the requisite sex appeal, so important to any creature trading on their skill in seduction and copulation. It had taken her over an hour to convince the poor man and his son to accompany her to the ministry, handing them over to the Muggle liaison office, with what she hoped was a tired but reassuring smile. The paperwork was going to be extensive, and she determined with malice she would ensure every page of it ended up on Malfoy's desk. A reminder that even Aurors, glamorous as they liked to think themselves to be, were still easily caught up in the tangle of administration that was the backbone of ministerial bureaucracy. Still, she could admit that as Aurors went, he had been very thorough, managing not to harm the man and making some fumbling attempts at kindness to the boy. It was a low bar, truly, but he'd worked with too many Aurors to hold them in particularly high regard. And he looked very fetching in his Auror robes, with his holster showcasing the muscle of his thigh quite nicely. He was pleasingly tall, and his badge was obviously well cared for. There was something, to her at least. "Excuse me, madam," Draco said firmly. He refused to call it in this time until he was absolutely certain it would be necessary. He would not make a fool of himself again, especially not in front of Hermione Granger. "I need to ask you some questions about your planned activities for the evening." The woman turned and Draco swallowed at the sight of the viscous fluid sticky on the high collar of her black cloak. Blood, he was sure. She hadn't even wiped her mouth, the remnants of some poor Muggle still coating her lips. Draco wrapped his hand around his ministry-issue garlic clove. The things included in his inventory really did beg a belief, ready to strike at any moment, although what he was supposed to do with it was anyone's guess.
"I want to see your blood,"
the woman said. Vowels elongated in a way that made her sound distinctly crumb-like, if you recalled correctly. "Oh, do you hail from Bulgaria?" he asked conversationally, scrambling for the protocol on vampire apprehension. Fang neutralization via sticking charm, he'd been told was most efficient, and minimal eye contact.
"Transylvania,"
the woman replied, laughing girlishly. He would not be taken in by her immortal charms. Draco wasn't entirely sure that was even a real country. His suspicion of nefarious intent was solidified. She took a deliberate step closer, intention clear in her eyes. That was when he saw her fangs. The surprise was only marginally less when the ostrich returned for a second time, demanding her presence once more and sounding incrementally more flustered, though still with an unmistakable imperiousness that almost made her refuse to attend the scene. But then she reasoned with herself. The veil was thinnest on this night. There was a chance that Malfoy really had encountered something truly dangerous. Her heart contracted slightly with pity. Newly qualified and allocated to Halloween night patrol without a partner, it was almost like they wanted him to fail. That simply wouldn't do. Hermione had always tried to help an underdog. She grabbed her wand. If Granger had been irked over the incubi incident, she was positively apoplectic about the vampire, or the ordinary Muggle woman as she turned out to be. "You can't just go around gluing women's mouths closed, Malfoy. No matter how much you might not like what they She was trying to bite me, Granger. She almost had me. What was I supposed to do? Oh, she was trying to get her mouth on you, all right, Hermione said with something that, if Draco wasn't mistaken, which he really, really hoped he wasn't, because his instincts had so far not been serving him well that evening, might have been jealousy. The woman, silenced by her predicament, had the decency to look moderately shamefaced and very, very angry with Draco. Any possibility of a kiss was now significantly diminished. He lamented only a little bit. I suppose I'll be cleaning up your messes all night? I am sorry, Granger. And to you also, madam. I had intended to ward her off with garlic, but she was— Draco glanced meaningfully at Granger. Very swift. And strong. I'm sure, Hermione said witheringly. Jealous? Draco attempted to keep his tone casual, a test and half a hope. He stuttered slightly, and he watched with incredulous satisfaction as a blush crept over her cheeks. She was, he realized, with unrestrained glee. It was the best reaction Draco could have hoped for. He had to remind himself that gloating was unbecoming of a gentleman. I'll make it up to you, he said. Fine. She eyed him carefully, seeming to consider for a moment. He seized his opportunity. What about I'll leave the paperwork on your desk. Or possibly not. Of course. And then I'll take you out too. I'll see you tomorrow night, she told him, appearing to collect herself. I don't expect to hear from you again tonight. No, he agreed. He could refrain from calling her for the rest of the evening. How many more Muggles could there be masquerading as magical creatures, even on Halloween? And he'd try again tomorrow. Draco thought if he completed his paperwork to a satisfactory standard, that was probably just the sort of thing that would make her susceptible to his offer for dinner after work. Despite his bad luck, Draco was feeling hopeful about the outcomes of this evening's events. Hermione slammed the door to her office closed. Jealous! As if she would ever be jealous of someone kissing Draco Malfoy. What a preposterous idea! She barely even knew him, really. So obviously, she hadn't been able to not notice that work he'd done to bring himself onto the right side of the law. The reparations he had made, the opinion pieces published, and the interviews given, detailing his journey to tolerance, to equality for Muggle-borns. That was all to be commended, of course. And if, whilst noticing those things, she'd also happened to observe that he was taller than the average man, broad of shoulder, thicker of hair, and sharp of jaw, well, it was just another thing she'd been unable to ignore. It didn't mean she was jealous. Far from it. If she wasn't jealous, though, which she wasn't, it became more difficult to explain why she had left the not-vampire sticking charm intact whilst she had processed the incident report. She did like quiet in her office, or why she'd not offered her a seat or a drink. She hadn't thought not requiring one herself. It wasn't like she'd blame her for Malfoy's idiocy, or was it the Auror's office fault for sending him out so ill-prepared? It also didn't offer a reason for why she'd felt so discouraged, enraged, irked, at the idea of the woman's lips on Malfoy, or her relief when she realized that he was not, in fact, reciprocating her enthusiasm. And it didn't mean a single thing of significance that her heart hammered slightly harder at the emergence of the now familiar ostrich through her door, ruffling its tail feathers in agitation. Granger, I really do think this might be a werewolf this time. It said, had bowed to look her in the eye in what she interpreted as urgency. She resolutely ignored it. I suppose there is a possibility it might be a very, very— careful there now. Step behind me, please. I've got it under— a very large dog. But I'm as certain as I can be that this is, without any exaggeration, life or death for me, Granger. He'd asked her to dinner, of all things. Dinner! Because he thought she was jealous. If you could attend at your convenience. Don't worry, young man. It's quite all right, but perhaps refrain from weeping until I've got the situation in hand. But preferably immediately. I can't seem to find my silver. She let herself consider the bird, its already enormous eyes wide, pleading even. She was almost taken in. There were two possibilities. The first was that Malfoy truly was utterly simple-minded, in which case there was no helping him, and she certainly should not encourage this developing crush on a man without sufficient intellect to distinguish, as he said himself, a werewolf from a very, very large dog. The second was that this was nothing more than an elaborate and particularly cruel ruse, designed to lower her guard and soften her heart towards him in his alleged need. Also, he could convince her to spend some time with him outside of work. It was possible he knew very well those were Muggles wearing fancy dress, and she'd fallen for it. Twice. Well, not again, she decided. He could get himself out of this one without her help. She left the ostrich in her office, only feeling a slight twinge of guilt as Malfoy's voice faded to nothing with the distance she put between them. Now, don't panic, chaps, Draco assured the collection of, now he saw it, definitely human children masqueraded poorly as demons in fairy and other assorted creatures of dubious origin. And lady, he added, nodding at the pig-tailed girl in a witch's hat, and a very large nose. Why would that be part of the disguise? He decided he would ask once he'd bravely and efficiently rescued them all from their current predicament. I know exactly what I'm doing, even if Granger does appear to be taking her time. He's just a bit confused with the whale being so thin tonight. It's not even a full moon, you know. I'm sure he won't be able to transform fully. The cracking of the werewolf's bones was punctuated by the shrieks of the gathered children. Draco was trying desperately to think. He seemed to have misled his silver handcuffs, and even if he'd had them, he'd struggled to get them around the werewolf's enormous, terrifyingly clawed paws anyways. The creature would likely be unaffected by almost his entire catalogue of spells. Draco grasped frantically for ideas. Bombarda? He tried, deciding he would deal with his third instance of breaking the statute of secrecy later. His spell did succeed in blasting the creature backward several feet. It also appeared to absolutely enrage it. No, okay, sorry, he told the werewolf, holding his hand up in apology. If you could just keep back from the children, I won't have to do that again. Reasoning appeared to be futile, as the creature advanced with increasing menace. He was low on ideas, and high on potential collateral damage, the group of 6 Muggle children he'd found being stalked by the wolf, all now cowering behind him. Draco swallowed. Merlin, was he going to die? Was he going to survive a murder attempt as the instigator, not the victim? Several rounds of torture, a fucking massive snake, a noseless tyrant, and a full-on battle on the grounds of his school, only to die on his first day as a productive member of society, when he just stumbled onto the fact that Granger might be jealous of people trying to kiss him. Not if he could help it, he decided. He widened his stance. Okay, he told the children. Listen, hush. Stop crying, this is important. Cry later all you want. No, your mom won't be angry, I promise. Now, when I hit him next... it's a want. Best not to ask too many questions about it. You're going to run, got it? As fast as you can, all the way back to the main street over there. No, don't stop at the slide, nor the swings. All the way to the houses. Can you do that?
What will you do?
Quiet voice trembled. The girl with the unfathomably large nose. I'm going to arrest him, Draco said, puffing up with pride. That's what Aurors are supposed to do. Hermione took great relish in gathering up the 2 files from the night before, deciding to deliver them personally to Draco Malfoy's desk. And yes, she could have sent them via the internal post. So slow. Had one of the secretaries run them up. An abuse of power, really. But what was the fun on holding a handsome man's utter foolishness over his head if you couldn't see his face whilst you revelled in your superior intellect and general competency? She was denied the privilege, though, because when she arrived at the Auror's office, he was nowhere to be found. "Excuse me," she interrupted the first person she came across. "I'm looking for Draco Malfoy." The light was blinding when Draco made his first attempt to crack open his eyes, to such an extent that he immediately decided to close them again, at least for a time until he collected his thoughts. His body was feeling surprisingly weightless and free of the crippling pain he'd been expecting, based on his recollection of how the encounter with the werewolf had gone. Which would have normally been a good thing had Draco not come to the conclusion that this absence of pain could only be an indication that he was, in fact, dead. He tried to see the positives in the situation. He seemed to have restrained his consciousness, which supported the possibility of an afterlife, and based on how comfortable and warm and quiet everything was, he might have stumbled by virtue of his frankly courageous sacrifice and all the service of saving those Muggle children into the place where the good people were sent. Still, it was a shame. He'd only worked a day in his job as an Auror after all that training. He'd never consumed the 20-year bottle of scotch he'd been saving, and it certainly put a stop to the tentative plans he'd made to Hermione Granger today. Did time still work the same once you were dead? Draco supposed he was about to find out. Draco had just resigned himself to it and was working his way up to cataloguing his surroundings. The afterlife surely wouldn't be all white, light, and silence, would it? That seemed terribly boring. When he heard it, a chastisement so venomous it sent a shiver up his spine. Maybe he hadn't gone anywhere good after all. "What the fuck, Malfoy?" The voice of an angel it was not. Malfoy looked, in a word, terrible. His cheekbones were covered in purple bruising so tender-looking she was struck with the strangest urge to brush her lips across it. Frustratingly, it did nothing to distract from the pleasing sharpness of his bone structure, and only served as farther contrast to the color of his eyes. Even beneath the bandages that covered his chest and arms, where they were visible above the sheets, he could see the firmness of his muscles and make out lines of definition on his biceps and pectorals. She should not have found it as appealing as she did. He peered balefully at her through tired eyes. I know, Granger. I will complete the paperwork just as soon as I've recovered from the injuries which, until about 5 seconds ago, I thought had me killed." "What on earth were you thinking taking on a werewolf alone?" she asked, poking him, gently with the consideration to his condition, in the arm. Of all the stupid things he's done the night before, that was by far the most imbecilic. "I didn't exactly have much of a choice in the matter, as my patronus went unanswered," he said, rubbing her hand to prevent any further assault. She would deny to anyone who asked that she spent the next few seconds cataloguing the roughness of his fingertips on the warmth of his palm. "If you'd sent another." "I didn't really have the time, what with all the heroics required to save the lives of 6 Muggle children I was trying to protect." "Heroics! If you'd not misidentified too," she tried to insist. "What would you call it then? Idiocy." There was no other word for it. Oh God, was he going to get an order of Merlin? He'd be insufferable. They'd better give him at least 2nd class, though, she thought. It was the least he deserved. 6 children. "Are they all right?" he asked softly. "The Muggle children?" Trust him to call her attention back to that. The only good deed he'd ever done, and it just so happened to be unconscionably selfless and brave, and prove, once and for all, that not an ounce of blood prejudice remained. "They're fine. They were very shaken. They're all very impressed with you." She rolled her eyes. It seems like everybody is. Not you, though. It was undoubtedly a question. She noticed that he had let go of her hand when he ran his thumb across her knuckles. I'm not unimpressed, she said sternly. You'd have thought she'd requested membership to the Draco Malfoy fan club, an actual thing that was in existence she'd recently discovered, what with the smile that broke over his face. Hermione made a valiant attempt to prevent her grin from spreading any wider. She failed, of course. He shifted up onto his elbows, and Hermione couldn't help but follow the direction of the sheets as they gathered at his waist. I think you were worried, Granger. I would have felt bad if you died. She could admit to that, at least. Good thing I didn't, then. I suppose. You can make it up to me by... I'm not going to do your paperwork. Hermione hated paperwork, truly. All right, he said, sighing in resignation. It will have to be dinner, then, instead. Well, she'd walked right into that. I suppose ostrich is off menu? Laugh all you want, Granger. They are beautiful, swift, and fierce. I think it's very fitting myself. Hermione couldn't find any part of her that disagreed. She went easily when he tugged her closer, refusing to relinquish his hold on her hand, giving in to the urge to run her finger over his cheek. He winced slightly in pain. Sorry. I don't mind. Is there anywhere that doesn't hurt? She asked, regretting before she'd even finished asking the opportunity she'd given him. Draco tapped a single graceful finger to his smiling lips. It was all a ploy, of course. She knew it was. Still, when she leaned to press her lips to his, breath fast and heart thumping, she couldn't say she wasn't happy to play along. The end. Hey everybody, I really hope you enjoyed today's story of the Spooktober fall festivities. There will of course be a new one tomorrow, and I hope you will tag along for tomorrow as well. I hope you're all doing great and have great fall activities you can do, or just have a tea, or take a walk, do something for yourself, take care of yourself, and I'll see you very soon.